The Zortak Galactic survey vessel's sovereign insight hung in the vast emptiness of space like a crystalline predator, its bioorganic hull shifting with subtle iridescence. Commander Rixel's primary sensory cluster pulsed with a rhythm that translated to pure, unadulterated contempt as the ship's advanced scanning arrays mapped the third planet of a thoroughly unremarkable solar system, Earth. A blue-green marble barely worth a second glance in the grand tapestry of galactic civilizations. Krev, the youngest data analyst aboard the vessel, struggled to maintain his professional composure. His tertiary neural cluster trembled with an emotion the Zortak rarely experienced, something akin to human curiosity. While the rest of the bridge crew processed the planetary data with clinical detachment, Krev saw something different. "Preliminary scans complete," announced Fox, the ship's primary data interpreter. Her voice carried the typical Zortak blend of clinical precision and genetic superiority. "Biological assessment. Primitive carbon-based life form. Technological development. Pre-interstellar. Projected survival potential. Minimal." Commander Rixel's massive form shifted in the command chair, multiple sets of eyes scanning the holographic displays. Each of his 7 sensory clusters processed information simultaneously, a biological advantage that had crushed countless civilizations across 3 galactic quadrants. The Zortak had perfected evolution, engineered their own biology to levels of complexity that made other species look like crude biological experiments. And yet, Krev's secondary neural cluster kept returning to anomalous data points that didn't quite fit the standard assessment. The planet's communication networks were chaotic, yes, but there was an underlying complexity that defied simple categorization. Random packet transmissions carried everything from scientific data to what appeared to be artistic expressions, entertainment protocols, and rapid-fire communication systems that seemed to operate on principles of controlled chaos. "Commander," Krev ventured, his voice a careful modulation of deference and professional observation, "the planetary communication networks suggest a level of adaptive complexity we haven't encountered before." Rixel's laughter was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the ship's bioorganic infrastructure. It was the laugh of a predator who had heard countless such observations before. "Complexity. They haven't even achieved stable planetary energy management. Look at their power distribution systems. Fragmented, inefficient, prone to localized failures." The holographic display zoomed in, showing Earth's electrical grids, a tangled web of interconnected systems that looked more like a child's random scribble than an engineered network. Power stations, solar collections, wind farms, and traditional fossil fuel generators existed in what appeared to be complete disorganization. But Krev saw something else. Each seemingly random connection point represented an adaptive response. When one section failed, others compensated. The system didn't rely on perfect design, but on continuous, dynamic reconfiguration. It was less an engineered grid and more a living organism. "Their biological profile is equally unimpressive," Vox continued, overlaying genetic scans that highlighted human physical limitations. "Short lifespans, minimal natural defenses, susceptibility to environmental changes. No redundant organ systems, no genetic memory transfer, no telepathic capabilities." Rixel's primary sensory cluster pulsed with amusement. A standard classification 7 submission protocol should bring them into compliance within standard galactic protocols. They'll be another client species integrated into our expanded territorial network. Yet Krev couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The human transmissions carried something ineffable. Emotions that defied standard computational models. Creativity that seemed to emerge from their very limitations. Art that transformed pain into beauty. Scientific discoveries born from what the Zortak would consider fundamental weaknesses. Their chaos looked deliberate. Their limitations appeared to be a choice, not a constraint. "Prepare standard first contact protocols," Rixel commanded. "Transmission package Alpha 7. Inform them of their new status in the galactic hierarchy." As the communication systems powered up, Krev made a notation in his personal log, a virtually unheard-of action for a Zortak analyst. A simple, cryptic observation that would later be remembered as prophetic. They do not look like a species waiting to be conquered. The Sovereign Insight moved into transmission position, completely unaware that it was about to become the focal point of the most significant miscalculation in galactic history. The United Nations Emergency Response Center looked nothing like the calm, controlled environment one might expect during a potential extinction-level event. It was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Military strategists, scientists, politicians, and communication experts moved with a synchronicity that would have impressed even the most advanced collective intelligence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of this storm, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to bend to her will. A quantum computing expert with a doctorate from MIT and field experience in adaptive systems design, she was the kind of human the Zortak would never comprehend. Her dark eyes reflected multiple screens simultaneously, processing information faster than most computational systems could manage. The alien transmission arrived with clinical precision. Massive screens throughout the facility lit up, displaying the Zortak communication, a multi-sensory assault designed to overwhelm and subjugate. Their message was a masterpiece of galactic intimidation, a detailed presentation of their evolutionary superiority that would have broken the spirit of most known civilizations. Commander Rixel's image dominated the primary display. His form was a nightmare of perfect biological engineering, multiple sensory clusters, redundant organ systems, and a physiological complexity that made human anatomy look like a child's crude sketch. When he spoke, the language translation system struggled to capture the full depth of his condescension. Inhabitants of planetary designation Earth 3, the translation began. Your technological and biological limitations have been comprehensively assessed. The Zortak Galactic Collective offers you a singular opportunity for survival. Complete surrender and integration as a client species will be accepted. Resistance is mathematically impossible. The presentation continued, a clinical dissection of human weakness. Charts showed comparative biological capabilities. Graphic representations demonstrated the vast technological gap between the Zortak and humanity. Each slide was a calculated psychological weapon designed to crush hope. In the UN Command Center, General Marcus Holloway, a veteran of multiple global conflict resolution missions, watched with a growing smile that had nothing to do with humor. "They have no idea," he muttered to Elena, "who they're talking to." Elena's response was already in motion. While the Zortak transmission continued its methodical breakdown of human limitations, she was orchestrating a response that would become legendary. With a series of rapid keystrokes that seemed to defy the very concept of manual input, she hijacked global communication networks, satellite systems, internet backbones, cellular networks, emergency broadcast systems. All became her canvas. The Zortak transmission abruptly cut out, replaced by a 47-second video that would be studied by xenoanthropologists for generations. It began with the most mundane of human achievements, a child taking its first steps. Then it escalated. Firefighters running into burning buildings, scientists working through seemingly impossible challenges, engineers constructing impossible structures, medical professionals fighting pandemics, artists creating beauty from chaos, musicians transforming pain into hope. The images moved with a rhythm that was part documentary, part symphony, part declaration of defiance. Each frame was a challenge, each moment a refutation of the Zortak's clinical assessment. And then Elena appeared. Behind her, complex holographic data streams danced, a visual representation of human technological potential that seemed to mock the alien's own display. "We don't want peace," she said, her voice cold and clear. "We want a challenge." The transmission ended. In the Sovereign Insight, Commander Rixel's sensory clusters went completely still. Yum Krev, monitoring the communication protocols, felt something unprecedented surge through his neural pathways. This was not a species preparing for submission. This was a species preparing for war. General Holloway turned to Elena, a rare smile breaking through his typically stoic demeanor. "Well," he said, "I think we just sent a message." Elena's response was characteristic. "No," she corrected, "we just started a conversation." Across the planet, humanity was already moving. Military units activated contingency protocols developed over decades of global conflict resolution. Scientific teams began rapid response research initiatives. Communication networks buzzed with a mixture of excitement, fear, and an undercurrent of something the Zortak would never understand. Anticipation. The first true test of humanity's potential had just begun. The Advanced Research Complex sat nestled in the Rocky Mountains, a facility so classified that even most government officials believed it was nothing more than a rumor. Here, Jack Harper moved like a predator through corridors, lined with the most advanced technological systems humanity had ever conceived. 48 hours after the Zortak transmission, the facility looked less like a research center and more like a war room crossed with the most innovative tech playground in human history. Jack wasn't a traditional scientist, a former Special Forces operator turned technology innovator. He represented a uniquely human archetype, the warrior scholar who saw technology as both a shield and a weapon. His team was equally unconventional. Quantum physicists who had spent years in underground gaming communities, cybersecurity experts with backgrounds in street art, neural interface designers who moonlighted as punk rock musicians. The alien probe they were dissecting was a marvel of biological technological integration. Where the Zortak saw a demonstration of power, Jack's team saw the most complex puzzle they'd ever encountered. Dr. Aisha Khan, the team's lead quantum computing expert, worked with a surgical precision that belied her almost manic excitement. "It's not just technology," she muttered, her hands moving through holographic interfaces that seemed to anticipate her thoughts. "It's a living system. They've blurred the line between biological organism and technological construct." Jack understood immediately. The Zortak didn't create technology. They grew it. Each system was part organic, part mechanical, with computational pathways that mimicked biological neural networks. It was beautiful, and it was about to be completely dismantled. "We're not trying to copy," Jack announced to the team. "We're going to rewrite." Within 12 hours, they had the first breakthrough. The probe's communication systems, designed to be impenetrable, became a conduit, not for the Zortak's intended purpose, but for something entirely unexpected. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, Elena's brother and an expert in adaptive systems, discovered something remarkable. The alien technology had built-in assumptions, computational pathways that presumed certain response patterns, certain levels of technological development. These weren't just weaknesses, they were invitations. "They've engineered a system so perfect," Marcus explained, "that it can't conceive of an approach outside its own logic." By the 72-hour mark, Jack's team had done the impossible. They weren't just reverse engineering the alien technology. They were transforming it. Communication protocols became weapons. Defensive systems were rewritten to become adaptive infiltration mechanisms. The Zortak's supposedly impenetrable technological infrastructure was being turned inside out, its own complexity becoming its greatest vulnerability. In the Sovereign Insight, Krev's monitoring systems began registering anomalies that defied computational prediction. Transmission protocols the Zortak had used for millennia suddenly became unpredictable. It was as if the very language of their technology was being rewritten. "Impossible," Vox muttered, her multiple sensory clusters firing in confused patterns. Commander Rixel leaned forward, multiple eyes focusing on the data streams. Something was changing. Something fundamental. Back in the mountain complex, Jack Harper allowed himself a rare smile. "They think technology is something you develop," he told his team. "We know technology is something you play with." The first true test came when they intercepted a secondary Zortak communication protocol. Instead of blocking or simply decoding it, Jack's team did something entirely unexpected. They responded, not with a message of war, not with a declaration of resistance, but with a piece of digital art so complex, so layered with adaptive algorithms, that it was simultaneously a communication, a weapon, and a challenge. It was quintessentially human. In that moment, the Zortak discovered a fundamental truth about humanity that their millennia of galactic conquest had never prepared them for. Humans didn't just adapt to technology. They transformed it. And they were just getting started. The global response to the alien ultimatum defied every known protocol of crisis management. Social media became a weapon more potent than any technological system. Within hours of the Zortak transmission, millions of memes, viral videos, and satirical content transformed the potential extinction event into a global phenomenon that was equal parts resistance and dark comedy. Alien invasion memes became the most followed account in human history overnight. Comedians live-streamed invasion preparation guides that were simultaneously serious survival instructions and elaborate comedy routines. Late-night talk show hosts turned potential planetary annihilation into primetime entertainment. In Times Square, a massive digital billboard cycled through increasingly absurd alien encounter scenarios. Top 10 ways humans will troll alien invaders. Read one headline. Another proclaimed, Aliens Wanted, Must Survive Internet Humor Department. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the unfolding psychological response with a mixture of professional fascination and personal pride. This wasn't just resistance. This was a uniquely human method of psychological warfare that no computational model could have predicted. Major General Marcus Holloway stood beside her, his typically stoic expression replaced by something between amusement and professional appreciation. "They have no idea what they're walking into," he muttered. On the Sovereign Insight, the alien response teams were experiencing something unprecedented. Their telepathic invasion protocols, which had systematically crushed the spirit of countless civilizations, encountered a communication network that defied all established psychological warfare models. Krev, the young Zortak analyst, found himself overwhelmed. Human communication wasn't linear. It wasn't hierarchical. It was a living, breathing, constantly mutating organism of information and emotion. A viral video emerged that perfectly captured the human spirit. Filmed in what appeared to be a suburban garage, a group of teenagers had created an elaborate musical number about alien invasion preparedness. The song was simultaneously a serious survival guide and a comedic masterpiece. Auto-tuned sections explained emergency communication protocols, while backup dancers performed increasingly ridiculous alien defense moves. Commander Rixel's primary sensory clusters began to experience something akin to cognitive dissonance. The human response violated every known psychological submission protocol. They were not afraid. They were excited. The music industry responded with unprecedented speed. Within 48 hours, multiple albums dropped with alien invasion themes. Rock bands released battle anthems. Electronic musicians created adaptive soundscapes designed to both entertain and potentially confuse alien communication systems. One particularly viral track, Galactic Trolling, by an underground electronic artist, became an inadvertent psychological weapon. Its complex algorithmic structure contained embedded communication patterns that would take Zortak analysts months to fully decode. Artists transformed city landscapes into massive, living resistance art installations. In New York, street artists created massive murals depicting humanity's defiance. In Tokyo, digital projection mapping turned skyscrapers into canvases of collective human creativity. In Rio de Janeiro, carnival performers began designing alien encounter costumes that were equal parts satire and potential combat camouflage. The psychological impact was devastating. The Zortak had encountered resistance before. They had crushed civilizations that fought back with traditional military might. They had broken species that responded with fear or aggression. But they had never encountered a species that responded to potential extinction with creativity, humor, and a fundamental refusal to be intimidated. Vox, the Zortak's primary communication analyst, submitted a report that would later be studied as a pivotal moment in galactic contact history. Humans psychological or espiones, KT Gigoric UNPOREDI T. Null. Recommendation. Immediate strategic reassessment. In the UN Command Center, Elena Rodriguez allowed herself a rare smile. They're not just preparing for a fight, she told General Holloway. They're rewriting the entire concept of conflict. Holloway nodded. Welcome to humanity, he responded, where our greatest weapon has always been our ability to transform challenge into an opportunity for collective creativity. The psychological warfare had begun, and humanity was just getting started. The Global Genetic Research Facility was unlike any scientific installation in human history. Located deep beneath the Andes Mountains, it represented the pinnacle of interdisciplinary scientific collaboration. Here, Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked alongside a team that defied traditional scientific boundaries. Dr. Imani Okoro, a Nigerian geneticist with a background in both traditional medicine and quantum biology, stood at the center of a holographic display that mapped the initial Zortak biological data. Her fingers moved with a dancer's grace, pulling apart complex genetic structures that most scientists would have considered incomprehensible. They've engineered themselves to be perfect, Imani muttered, which means they've also engineered themselves to be predictable. The Zortak biological system was a masterpiece of genetic engineering. Redundant organ systems, rapid cellular regeneration, adaptive immune responses that could neutralize most known biological threats. They had spent millennia perfecting their genetic code, creating a species that seemed to have eliminated every possible biological weakness. But perfection, the human team was discovering, was its own form of limitation. Dr. Rodriguez approached the holographic display, her mind already racing through possibilities that would make traditional scientific methodology look like child's play. We're not going to fight their biology, she announced to the team. We're going to play with it. The initial breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, Elena's brother and a specialist in adaptive systems, noticed something peculiar in the Zortak genetic structure. Their biological perfection relied on a complex, but ultimately rigid set of genetic parameters. They've optimized for known threats, Marcus explained, but they've eliminated the very mechanism that allows for true adaptation: randomness. Human genetic research had always been different. Where other species sought perfection, humans embraced variability. Their genetic code was less a blueprint and more a jazz improvisation, constantly shifting, adapting, finding unexpected solutions. The team began developing a biological countermeasure that was part scientific innovation, part artistic expression. Nanotechnology merged with genetic engineering. Adaptive algorithms danced with cellular structures. They weren't creating a weapon. They were creating a conversation. Within 72 hours, they had developed the first generation of what would become known as the Adaptive Response Protocol, a biological system that could rewrite itself faster than the Zortak could comprehend. In the Sovereign Insight, the first signs of trouble emerged in the most unexpected way. Krev's monitoring systems began detecting genetic mutations in the ship's biological infrastructure that defied all known parameters. It wasn't an attack. It was something far more terrifying. It was a conversation. The human-developed nanotech didn't just attack Zortak biological systems. It engaged with them, probed them, learned from them, and then began to rewrite them in ways that the Zortak's perfect genetic code could not predict. Commander Rixel watched in growing horror as the first reports came in. Ship systems began to experience genetic drift, cellular structures that seemed to be learning, adapting, transforming. "This is impossible," Vox muttered, her multiple sensory clusters firing in patterns of pure confusion. But for the human team, it was just the beginning. Dr. Okoro allowed herself a rare smile. "Biological warfare," she said to Elena. "No, this is biological jazz. We're not destroying their system. We're improvising with it. The implications were staggering. The Zortak had spent millennia engineering a species free from biological limitations. Humans were showing them that limitation was the very source of true adaptability. Their perfection was becoming their greatest weakness, and humanity was just getting started. The Sovereign Insight's bridge transformed from a pinnacle of galactic engineering to a scene of mounting chaos. Commander Rixel's multiple sensory clusters pulsed with an emotion the Zortak had rarely experienced: genuine uncertainty. Krev, the young analyst who had first sensed something unique about humanity, now stood at the epicenter of a developing crisis that defied every computational model in the Zortak's extensive database. The ship's systems were no longer simply under attack. They were engaged in a constant, dynamic conversation with an intelligence that refused to follow any known rules of engagement. Adaptive infiltration detected in tertiary computational clusters, Vox reported, her voice betraying the first hints of genuine concern. Biological-technological integration experiencing unexpected mutations. What the Zortak didn't understand was that humans didn't see technology and biology as separate systems. They were artists of adaptation, turning limitations into opportunities with a creativity that bordered on the miraculous. The initial biological countermeasure, developed by Dr. Elena Rodriguez's team, had been more than a weapon. It was a probe, a communication, a living system of information that transformed everything it touched. Where the Zortak saw perfect engineering, humans saw an ecosystem waiting to be reimagined. On Earth, the response was equally unprecedented. Military strategists worked alongside artists, musicians, programmers, and scientists in a global collaboration that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. The alien invasion had done what decades of global initiatives had failed to do: create a truly unified human response. General Marcus Holloway coordinated from a command center that looked more like a creative studio than a traditional military installation. Holographic displays showed real-time adaptations of human strategies, each modification a collective decision that emerged from a global neural network of human creativity. "They're not just fighting," Holloway muttered to Elena Rodriguez, who stood nearby monitoring the technological infiltration. "They're composing." Commander Rixel watched in growing horror as human strategies began to deconstruct the Zortak's supposedly impenetrable systems. It wasn't a linear assault. It was a fluid, dynamic engagement that changed moment by moment, defying every known principle of conflict. Krebs' analysis revealed something profound. The human approach wasn't about defeating the Zortak. It was about engaging with them in a way that transformed the very concept of conflict. Transmission protocols became living systems. Defensive mechanisms transformed into communication channels. Every Zortak technological assumption was being rewritten in real time. "We are experiencing," Vox reported, her voice now carrying a subtle tremor, "a complete systemic reconfiguration that defies all known computational models." The ship's internal systems began to respond in ways that terrified the Zortak leadership. Redundant biological-technological interfaces started to display characteristics of learning, of adaptation that went beyond their engineered parameters. It was as if humanity had introduced a virus of creativity into the Zortak's perfect system. On the bridge, Commander Rixel experienced something unprecedented. For the first time in the Zortak's extensive galactic history, they were encountering a species that didn't just resist. A species that transformed the very concept of resistance into something entirely new. "They are not fighting like a species," Krev observed, his analysis becoming increasingly philosophical. "They are fighting like a global organism." The turning tide was about more than technological supremacy. It was about a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence, conflict, and adaptation could mean. Humanity wasn't just defending itself. It was engaging in the most complex form of communication the galaxy had ever witnessed. And they were just getting started. The world had never been more united. Countries that had spent decades in bitter conflict now moved with a synchronicity that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The potential extinction of humanity had become the ultimate catalyst for global cooperation. In Tokyo, Software engineers worked alongside traditional artisans to develop adaptive communication systems. Their designs merged centuries-old techniques of pattern recognition with cutting-edge quantum computing, creating transmission protocols that were simultaneously art and weapon. The Brazilian Amazon research stations transformed into global communication hubs. Indigenous knowledge systems, long marginalized by traditional scientific communities, now became crucial sources of adaptive thinking. Researchers who had spent decades studying ecological resilience found themselves at the forefront of humanity's defense. Dr. Elena Rodriguez coordinated from a global command center that defied traditional military hierarchy. Here, a musician sat beside a quantum physicist. A street artist discussed communication strategies with a nuclear engineer. A chef with expertise in complex flavor interactions worked on adaptive algorithmic models. General Marcus Holloway watched the unfolding global response with a mixture of professional pride and genuine wonder. "We're not just defending," he muttered to Elena. "We're evolving." The global resistance wasn't just a military response. It was a civilizational immune system activating. Agricultural experts developed emergency food distribution networks that could adapt in real time to potential alien disruption. Urban planners redesigned city infrastructures to become living defensive systems. Artists created morale-boosting content that was simultaneously entertainment and psychological warfare. In Mumbai, a group of street performers developed a series of adaptive dance routines that contained embedded communication protocols. Their performances could transmit complex information while appearing to be simple entertainment. It was art as intelligence, movement as message. The sovereign insights monitoring systems struggled to comprehend the human response. Where they expected hierarchical communication, they found a network. Where they anticipated rigid structures, they encountered fluid adaptation. Krev, the young Zortak analyst, found himself experiencing something close to emotional overwhelm. The human response defied every computational model in the Zortak's extensive database. "They are not a species," he reported to an increasingly concerned leadership. "They are a living planetary system." Each human profession became a front in this unprecedented conflict. Farmers transformed agricultural networks into adaptive communication systems. Their understanding of ecological resilience provided crucial insights into systemic adaptation. Musicians created soundscapes that contained embedded communication protocols. Their compositions were simultaneously art and intelligence transmission. Teachers developed educational modules that prepared global populations not just for resistance, but for a fundamental reimagining of human potential. Computer programmers worked alongside philosophers, creating adaptive systems that merged technological innovation with deep ethical considerations. The Zortak had invaded expecting a linear conflict. Instead, they found themselves engaged in a multidimensional conversation that transformed the very concept of resistance. Commander Rixel watched in growing horror as human strategies continued to defy every known principle of galactic conflict. Their approach wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about transforming the very ecosystem of conflict. "We are experiencing," Vox reported, her multiple sensory clusters firing in increasingly erratic patterns, "a complete systemic reconfiguration that challenges fundamental principles of galactic engagement." In the Global Command Center, Elena Rodriguez allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. This wasn't just about defending Earth. It was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to intelligence, to conflict, to existence itself. "We're not just fighting," she told General Holloway. "We're communicating on a level they've never encountered." The global resistance had become something more than a defensive action. It was a planetary-scale demonstration of human potential. And humanity was just getting started. The final confrontation was nothing like anyone had anticipated. The sovereign insight hung in Earth's orbit, no longer a vessel of conquest, but a study in systematic deconstruction. Commander Rixel's multiple sensory clusters pulsed with an emotion the Zortak had never experienced. Complete, fundamental uncertainty. Krev, the young analyst who had first sensed humanity's potential, now stood as the primary interpreter of a conflict that defied every known principle of galactic engagement. The ship's systems had become a living testament to human adaptability, not destroyed, but transformed. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the Global Command Center, her team having orchestrated a confrontation that was simultaneously a battle, a communication, and a profound philosophical statement. The human response hadn't been about defeating the Zortak. It had been about engaging with them on a level that challenged the very foundations of their understanding of intelligence, conflict, and existence. Biological systems that the Zortak had engineered to be perfect now displayed characteristics of learning, of adaptation that went far beyond their original parameters. Technological interfaces responded with a fluidity that bordered on consciousness. What had begun as an invasion had become the most complex communication event in galactic history. "We're not conquering," Elena explained to General Holloway. "We're conversing." On the Sovereign Insight, Commander Rixel received the transmission that would redefine galactic understanding. It wasn't a declaration of victory. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. The message was a complex algorithmic structure that simultaneously functioned as communication, art, and a fundamental reimagining of interspecies engagement. Embedded within were layers of information that spoke to the Zortak's own biological and technological systems, not to destroy, but to understand. Vox, the ship's primary communication analyst, struggled to process the transmission. It contained scientific data, artistic expressions, philosophical insights, and adaptive communication protocols that seemed to reshape themselves with each moment of analysis. "They are offering," Krev reported, his voice a mixture of wonder and professional precision, "a different model of existence." The global human response had been unprecedented. Every profession, every cultural tradition had become part of a planetary-scale adaptive system. Farmers, artists, scientists, musicians, philosophers, all had contributed to a response that was more than a defense. It was a demonstration of human potential. The Zortak had invaded expecting a linear conflict. Instead, they found themselves engaged in a multidimensional conversation that transformed the very concept of resistance. Commander Rixel's final report to Zortak High Command would become a legendary document in galactic archives. Humanity cannot be understood through traditional computational models. They are not a species. They are a living, adaptive planetary intelligence that transforms challenge into opportunity. Our concepts of biological and technological superiority are fundamentally inadequate. In the Global Command Center, Elena Rodriguez understood something profound. This wasn't just about defending Earth. It was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to intelligence, to conflict, to existence itself. The final transmission from the human team was a masterpiece of communication. It contained scientific data, artistic expressions, philosophical insights, and adaptive communication protocols. It was an invitation to a different kind of galactic engagement. Krev would later describe it as the moment humanity rewrote the rules of galactic interaction. The Zortak were not defeated. They were transformed. They had come expecting to conquer a primitive species. They were leaving with a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could mean. Humanity had done more than survive. They had initiated a conversation that would reshape galactic understanding for millennia to come. And they were just getting started.